So, agriculture within the UN climate negotiations. I'm going to try to give you an overview of the agriculture issue within the negotiations right now, and some of the key, although not all, but some of the key policy questions that, from a climate justice perspective. The adaptation challenges are enormous, and if you think about the challenges of climate change for agriculture, you might put adaptation sort of at the top of the list of what are the things that we need to worry about. There is one main place where agriculture is, where negotiations on agriculture are concentrated right now within the negotiations. It's under negotiation under the LCA track because it's a sector. Because it's one of the sectors that's mentioned in one of the articles of the UNFCCC that deals with technology transfer. And that's the hook that they've used, technology transfer for mitigation purposes. So the hook of getting it into the negotiations is under a tech transfer, a mitigation tech transfer article. And the World Bank, this is part of their climate smart agenda, and they talk about this as about the practices that bring about soil carbon sequestration in Africa as bringing about a triple win. The practices that we're talking about are great practices. It's the practices themselves that would lead to carbon sequestration are actually practices that I think most of us in this room would be really excited to hear the World Bank talking about. The agroecological practices of mulching, of cover cropping, of using compost and manures. In order to get carbon in the soil, you've got to put it there, right? So central to soil carbon sequestration is using compost and manure to put carbon into the soil. When you do that, and this is how the bank talks about the triple win, you increase productivity. That's one of the pieces of their triple win. You increase the adaptation potential of farmers because you're actually increasing the health of the soil. You're increasing the water holding capacity of the soil. You're increasing the ability for water to infiltrate. And you're generally creating a more resilient system. So the second part of the triple win is the adaptation benefits. And then the third part of the triple win, which is central, is the mitigation potential. That you're actually supposedly pulling carbon out of the atmosphere and helping us all in our plight of addressing the issue of global warming. And a key question that is for negotiators right now, and a point of political struggle, is can and should we rely on the market to fund the adoption of these practices? Go ahead. And are these practices the entirety of the adaptation agenda? And I would suggest that if resilient agricultural systems, how to create resilient agricultural systems is the question, then the adaptation agenda has to be broader than a set of practices that are geared specifically towards soil carbon sequestration. An adaptation-focused agenda would have direct support for agroecological practices to increase resilience, not support mediated through a market. Let's just give the money directly to farmers rather than create a crazy market-based scheme. We need everybody involved in the challenge of adaptation with respect to breeding, with respect to water harvesting, with respect to meteorological capacity on the ground, helping farmers understand what the next season's going to look like in terms of rain, what the next couple of years are going to look like in terms of rain. And I say there capacity building, knowledge sharing, and technology transfer, fully recognizing that this isn't what's needed and what's going to work is not just some of this work happening at the top and trickling down. But South Africa, the government of South Africa wants to have an outcome on agriculture in Durban. And so I expect that kind of pressure that will come from African countries will give a little bit more momentum to this text than we've seen to date. The World Bank has been quite involved over the last few months in pulling together meetings in Africa with African departments of agriculture, and just last week with agriculture ministers, in order to engineer this particular outcome, which includes, for the World Bank, an ideal outcome would include the carbon market piece. And they have been bankrolling the effort. And they freely admit that they've been paying for these meetings to bring African governments together. I would say, in conclusion, that the adaptation challenge for Durban is actually to pull those discussions about agriculture out of the mitigation frame and reframe towards adaptation. And yes, rather than mitigation and the markets.